She spent 8 years building a rocket engine they said was impossible. But on launch day they gave credit to the intern who once called her the office diversity bonus. When she stood to speak, security escorted her out, mid-applause. The crowd thought it was a mistake, until she vanished from the company website, like she never existed. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The glass doors of Kepler Tech Aerospace Solutions hissed open with a sleek whoosh, revealing a lobby so pristine it almost dared you to breathe. Polished chrome, wall-to-wall LED panels displaying satellites in orbit, and a giant suspended model of the Artemis rocket hung like a crown jewel in the center of the ceiling. This was the place where ideas defied gravity, and where Nyla Carter had dreamed of belonging since she was 12. She stepped inside, shoulders square under her navy blazer, natural curls tucked neatly into a low bun. Her resume read like a blueprint for greatness. Dual degrees from Princeton and MIT, internship at JPL, and a co-authored white paper on laser-based propulsion systems. Her mentors called her the one who could lead Mars colonization within a decade. But none of that mattered when the receptionist looked up and said, "Oh great, you're early. The supply closet is down the hall, second door on the right. Just grab a mop, the floor by the prototype wing is a mess." Nyla froze. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't surprise. It was the quiet gut punch of recognition, that heavy, bitter taste black professionals knew all too well. The receptionist didn't ask her name, didn't glance at her ID badge, just saw a black woman in slacks, and decided she was there to clean up. "Actually," Nyla said calmly, holding out her badge, "I'm reporting for engineering orientation. Nyla Carter, propulsion team." The woman's smile stuttered. Oh, I didn't mean sorry. I just But Nyla was already walking past her. She didn't need an apology. She'd heard versions of it her whole life. At science fairs, at conferences, even in classrooms she'd taught in. Behind her, the receptionist whispered to someone on the phone. "No, she's not facilities. She's a new hire." "Yeah, I know." The elevator ride to the 5th floor felt longer than it should have. As she stepped out, the hum of innovation surrounded her. Low murmurs of collaboration, screens lit with schematics, and a faint chemical scent of metal and solvents. This was the heart of Kepler Tech, where next-gen propulsion systems were born. She spotted her team by the glass-walled lab. 10 engineers, mostly white, mostly men, clustered around a digital display of a propulsion schematic. Laughter erupted as one of them gestured animatedly. Nyla approached, lifting a hand slightly. "Hi." A short, balding man in a plaid shirt cut her off. "Copy rooms that way," he said, not even glancing at her. "We'll need 20 of these printed before the lunch brief." Nyla blinked. "I'm not." Another voice interrupted. Cool, clipped, and unmistakably amused. "Let me guess. Not here to make copies." The man turned fully now, eyes narrowing. "Then what are you here for?" She extended her hand. "Nyla Carter, Propulsion Division. Dr. Reyes brought me on for the Artemis X project." The group went quiet. Someone chuckled under their breath. One of the engineers, young, red-haired, probably an Ivy guy himself, tilted his head like a dog, hearing a foreign sound. "No offense," he said slowly, "but since when do you people do rocket science?" Nyla's jaw clenched. She didn't rise to it, didn't take the bait. She'd practiced this moment, in her mirror, in interviews, in airports where TSA triple-checked her laptop like it had no business in her hands. "Since before you learned what a vector was," she said, voice steady. That shut him up. Temporarily. Her assigned workspace was a corner desk outside the main lab. No windows. No personal login credentials yet. While the rest of the team wore white lab coats and scrolled through dynamic simulations, she sat trying to request email access from IT. Hours passed. No one spoke to her, unless she spoke first. When she asked for access to the laser engine files she'd helped design in graduate research, Brent, the senior engineer with a permanent smirk, said, "We're trying not to cross-contaminate data with interns." "I'm not an intern," she replied. "Right. Diversity hire. Got it." He said it under his breath, but loud enough. Lunchtime arrived. The team headed out in groups. Nyla stayed behind, microwaving a protein bowl in the break room. As the timer ticked, 2 women entered, both engineers, both white, and didn't notice her sitting there. "I don't care if she has degrees. She's going to make everything political. Raise is just virtue signaling." I heard she didn't even interview. Nyla stood slowly. Their faces changed color like someone had sucked the oxygen out of the room. You forgot your water bottle, Nyla said coolly, handing it over before walking out. By mid-afternoon, she had enough. Her credentials still hadn't arrived. She couldn't access the propulsion design boards. Every request went ignored or deflected. The team treated her like a walking HR liability, smiling too wide, then whispering as soon as she left the room. So she decided to be seen. The laser design schematic was displayed on the main board, in Lab 3C. She walked in, logged into the guest account she'd been given, and began annotating corrections directly onto the model, just as Dr. Reyes had authorized in their onboarding email. Her fingers moved fast, eyes scanning for error points. It was clear the current model had a flaw in heat dissipation, under vacuum, something that would have been caught by anyone with lunar payload experience. Nyla adjusted a parameter. Suddenly, a slap cracked the air. Pain bloomed across her wrist. She stumbled back, staring in shock, as Brent loomed over her, eyes cold. "You people don't touch prototypes," he snarled. Nyla blinked, clutching her hand. Her heart thudded in her ears. Everyone in the lab had gone silent. No one stepped forward. No one spoke. And no one looked surprised. Nyla didn't report the slap. She didn't trust HR yet. She barely trusted the walls not to echo her thoughts. And when she glanced around that lab, saw the eyes quickly avert and the mouths stay closed, she understood. Reporting wouldn't make her safer. It would make her disposable. So instead, she wrapped her bruised wrist in a wrist brace she kept from a college injury and returned to her desk. No one asked if she was okay. The next morning, her new duties became clear. There was no formal reassignment, no email, no label on her desk. But people began leaving things, paperwork to be scanned, used coffee mugs, food delivery bags, with casual entitlement. "Mind tossing this for me?" one engineer asked, shoving his half-eaten burrito container into her hands. "Thanks, Nyla." She said nothing. Another left a sticky note. "Conference room C out of napkins. Help?" She ignored that one. Later, a manager casually leaned over her desk. "Hey, Nyla. Just a heads up, if you're not handling the kitchen stuff, let the admin team know, yeah? We've got VPs visiting this week. Needs to be tight." It wasn't a job. It was a warning. By the end of the week, she'd stopped asking for design access. She showed up on time, sat at her desk, watched from the edge of brilliance like a ghost who once had a name. Her notebooks filled with her own propulsion concepts sat untouched in her drawer. Every time she tried to bring up a technical insight, someone redirected the conversation or politely looped her out. One afternoon, a large sheet cake appeared in the break room for someone's birthday. Nyla, still in her seat, watched as everyone gathered around to sing. A moment later, one of the engineers called out, "Hey Nyla, could you grab the plates? Think they're out in the supply closet." She stood slowly, not because she wanted to, but because silence in that room felt more dangerous than complicity. When she returned with the plates, someone handed her a knife. "Mind cutting?" She held it for a moment, noticing how no one looked her in the eye. Then she began slicing. On Monday morning, her badge still didn't unlock the prototype lab. But the interns did. Kyle Whitmore, 22, recent graduate from Purdue, decent GPA, no publications, no research experience, no aerospace background. But his father had once consulted for Kepler Tech, and he said bro a lot. "Yo, Dr. C," Kyle called cheerfully as she passed his desk. "Need help finding the break room again?" Nyla didn't respond. "Just kidding," he added with a wink. "Chill. It's all love." That afternoon, Nyla overheard something that made her stop mid-step. She had gone to refill her tea in the kitchen when she passed the glass conference room. Inside, her entire division was gathered. Projectors on, design files pulled up, Brent at the front. But it wasn't Brent talking. It was Kyle. He was explaining propulsion dispersal timing, using the exact same language Nyla had written in her graduate thesis. She moved closer, heart accelerating. Kyle clicked to the next slide. A heat map diagram. A model she knew too well. Her name was nowhere on it. Someone inside said, "Wow, did you design this yourself?" Kyle grinned. "Pretty much, yeah. Took a few late nights, but worth it." Brent patted him on the back like a proud father. "That's why we bring in fresh eyes, folks." Nyla took a step back. Then another. Later that day, she found her own schematic filed away under archived inputs. stripped of metadata, her name scrubbed from the comments. She confronted Brent. He didn't even look up from his desk. "Look," he said, clicking through tabs. "This isn't about ownership. It's about collaboration. You assigned a fresh graduate to lead a schematic I published." Brent leaned back in his chair. "Published where?" She paused. "IAA Journal of Propulsion and Power." He smirked. "Oh, those niche university journals. Cute. That design won an innovation grant from Lockheed. Then maybe Lockheed should have hired you." His words fell like acid. Smooth, quiet, corrosive. Nyla sat in her car that night, parked in the shadow of the company building, staring at her steering wheel. It had only been 8 days since she started. She had imagined Kepler Tech would be the turning point. The moment all the sacrifices, late nights, student debt, missed birthdays would mean something. But now, she was more invisible here than she'd ever been in school. Because at least in academia, you had to back your bias with math. Here, all it took was assumption. She'd walked into the building as an engineer. But every day since, they'd rewritten her role without saying a word. The next morning, Kyle walked by her desk whistling, a folder under his arm. "Big day," he said. "Wish me luck." She didn't ask, but she heard Brent's voice echoing from the hallway. "Today's Kyle's big presentation for the Artemis board. Make sure you back him up. If this goes well, we might have our youngest lead ever." Nyla's chest went tight. She pulled up her old thesis, the source of the schematic, her exact diagrams, language, flowchart. Then she pulled up Kyle's file. The match was unmistakable. Word for word. She scheduled a meeting with HR. Her complaint was professional. Measured. She brought documents, time-stamped files, emails from her research advisors. The HR rep, a woman named Marla, nodded a lot, jotted notes, sipped a purple smoothie through a metal straw. When Nyla finished, Marla leaned in slightly. "I hear you, and I respect your courage." Nyla waited. "But just for transparency," Marla continued, "Brent's been with the company for 12 years. Kyle's on a mentorship track through executive sponsorship. This is a very interconnected team. I'm not here to break connections. I'm here to correct theft." Marla smiled tightly. "Understood. We'll circle back." Nyla never heard from her again. A week later, her team won an Internal Innovation Award. Kyle accepted it on behalf of the group. Brent posted the photo on LinkedIn, with the caption, "Proud of our future rocket leaders. This is what thinking outside the box looks like." Nyla was cropped out of the photo. Not metaphorically. Literally. Her shoulder was visible in the corner. That evening, she returned to the lab to retrieve a forgotten notebook. She paused outside the door, hearing laughter. Inside, Brent and 2 others were joking. "She thinks a thesis from a black Ivy League girl trumps industry instinct." More laughter. "I'm telling you, if HR didn't have its hands tied, she'd be back wiping counters where she belongs." They didn't know she was standing there. Or maybe they did. Either way, they didn't care. Nyla didn't cry when she got back to her apartment. She opened her laptop, pulled up every version of her propulsion model, annotated them with clear timestamps and email chains. She backed it all up on a hard drive, then printed a copy of her Lockheed grant letter, and placed it beside her thesis. She wasn't sure what her next move was. Not yet. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let Kyle Whitmore rise off her mind, and her name without consequences. The next morning, an all-hands email went out. "Congratulations to Kyle Whitmore on being appointed lead systems designer for the Artemis X propulsion test phase. He would now oversee the very engine Nyla had built." The announcement came with applause, cupcakes, and a laminated badge that read, "Kyle Whitmore, lead systems designer, Artemis." Nyla stood at the back of the break room, arms crossed, lips tight. No one acknowledged her presence. Not Brent, who raised a toast to young excellence. Not Kyle, who accepted the badge with mock humility and a nervous chuckle, saying, "I'm just honored to represent the next generation of space innovation." She didn't expect thanks. But what stung, what truly stung, was the stolen glance from one of the HR reps who gave her a faint, pitiful smile, as if to say, "Sorry, sweetheart. That's how it is." The whispers began within days. They always do when a black woman dares to exist in a space not built for her. In meetings, every time Nyla offered input, there was a shift, barely perceptible, but present. A smirk from one engineer, a side-eye from another, an audible sigh. Her points were met with silence, only to be rephrased and repeated minutes later by someone else. Usually male, usually white, who received nods and affirmation. And then the whispers started in earnest. She's here because of DI. Affirmative action gone too far. They just needed a black face on the brochure. She hasn't even published anything real. That last one hit harder than it should have. She had published, but they'd made sure no one remembered. Her inbox flooded with meeting invites for committees she never signed up for. ERRG planning, Juneteenth engagement, women in aerospace panel. She wasn't opposed to representation. She'd spoken at panels before, mentored students, funded scholarships. But this wasn't outreach. This was containment. They didn't want her voice. They wanted her image. A checkbox. A poster girl for diversity. As long as she didn't challenge the system she was supposed to make look better. One afternoon, as she walked into a meeting on fuel testing protocols, someone muttered just loud enough behind her, "Here comes the quota." She turned, slowly, but the room had already shifted focus. It wore her down, quietly. That's the thing with racism in boardrooms. It doesn't come as slurs or shouting. It shows up as questions that never stop circling. Am I being paranoid? Did that really happen the way I think it did? Is it worse if I say something? Will they see me as angry, difficult, ungrateful? At home, Nyla stopped checking her mirror. She stopped calling her mother back. Even her plants started to wither from neglect. One morning she came in early to prep for a 9 a.m. review. She needed access to the propulsion control module, standard for engineers on the Artemis team. She swiped her badge. The door blinked red. Access denied. She tried again. Same result. She checked the door's ID screen. It wasn't a system error. Her badge had been revoked from the lab she was hired to contribute to. Before she could even process it, Kyle walked up behind her, sipping an energy drink. "Yo, did you forget the access code? I'm using my badge." He scanned his green light. Door opened. He held it for her without looking up. "Might want to check with IT. They've been reconfiguring access. Something about streamlining." Nyla walked past him without a word. In the lab, she tried logging into the prototype dashboard. Access restricted. Even the shared Artemis files had been moved to a Tier 1 engineering cloud system, where her credentials no longer worked. Her name was still on the org chart, but her digital fingerprints were gone. She went to Brent. "Someone changed my access levels." He clicked away at his monitor, feigning confusion. Must be a firewall reorg. I'll put in a ticket. No one told me I was removed." He shrugged. "Probably a miscommunication. You know how messy admin gets when they're overloaded. I need access restored today. I'll see what I can do." He didn't. Later that day, she overheard two engineers in the break room. "She keeps walking around like she's in charge of something. She's just lucky to be here. I mean, let's be real." Nyla turned the corner just as they laughed. The shorter one saw her and froze. The taller one didn't even flinch. "What?" he said, locking eyes with her. "We're not lying." That night, Nyla sat in her apartment with her laptop open and her resume on screen. She hadn't looked at it since she got hired. Now, she stared at her accomplishments like they belonged to someone else. Graduated magna cum laude. Designed propulsion models cited by aerospace think tanks. Granted security clearance for NASA briefings. And yet, here she was, shut out of her own project, demoted without announcement, erased in plain sight. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. An email. From her updated security protocols. "You are currently classified as support staff, non-core engineering. Please contact your supervisor for reauthorization." Support staff. Her throat tightened. She hadn't been demoted on paper. But in the system, she was now the equivalent of a floating admin, and no one had said a word. The next day, Dr. Reyes returned from medical leave. The only person at Kepler Tech who had ever truly vouched for Nyla. Nyla requested a 10-minute meeting. It took her 2 hours to get on his calendar. When she walked into his office, he looked tired but kind. His salt and pepper beard had grown scruffier. He motioned for her to sit. "I know you're busy," she said, "but I need to show you something." She placed her laptop on his desk and opened the Artemis X schematic, the version published under Kyle's name, and overlaid it with her original thesis. Dr. Reyes leaned forward, brows furrowing. "This isn't similar," he said. "It's identical." She nodded. He didn't even change the axis labels. He leaned back, rubbed his temples. "I trusted Brent," he murmured. "I thought he'd give you space to lead. He gave me a seat in the hallway," she said, "and then he gave my work to someone who calls me Dr. C like it's a nickname." Dr. Reyes looked at her for a long time. Then he stood. I'll handle it. But by the end of that week, Dr. Reyes had gone dark. His calendar was blocked, his meetings cancelled, his internal messages unanswered. And then a rumor began to spread. Reyes was stepping down. Health issues, they said. Internal audit, someone else whispered. But Nyla had a different theory, one that chilled her to the bone. Someone at Kepler Tech didn't like what Reyes had seen, and they were making sure he couldn't do anything about it. The next Monday, Nyla tried again to swipe into the lab. This time, instead of access denied, a message blinked up. Unauthorized user. Please report to security. The security guard's expression was blank, mechanical. I'm going to need you to come with me, he said, holding out a clipboard. Nyla hesitated. Why? You've been flagged for unauthorized access attempts. Just protocol. She followed him silently through the white corridors, past glass walls where engineers leaned over terminals, pretending not to watch. Every footstep echoed like an accusation. They stopped at a narrow office with no windows. Inside, a woman from compliance sat behind a desk, flanked by a monitor displaying a paused security video. She motioned for Nyla to sit. There's been an incident, the woman began. The word sat heavy in the air. What kind of incident? Nyla asked. A prototype from the Artemis propulsion module. Component X7 has gone missing from Lab 4B. The loss was flagged during our morning audit. Nyla narrowed her eyes. And what does that have to do with me? The woman clicked the keyboard. The video played. Grainy footage. Black and white. A figure entering the lab late at night, face obscured by a cap, moving with deliberate purpose. They moved straight to the storage unit, opened the secure cabinet, and exited carrying a sealed container. The timestamp read 2:46 a.m. Sunday. The lab coat had N. Carter stitched into the chest. Nyla's voice dropped. That's not me. The woman paused the footage, zoomed in. You're the only one whose ID badge attempted access that night. My badge has been revoked for days. You know that. We only have system data. The woman replied coolly. And the footage. I wasn't even on the premises. Can you prove that? Nyla clenched her fists. Can you prove that I wasn't hacked? That someone didn't use a cloned badge? The woman leaned back, expression unreadable. We're not accusing you of theft, Miss Carter. But protocol requires your clearance remain suspended until the matter is resolved. Suspended. Not for incompetence. Not for insubordination. For suspicion. By the time she returned to her desk, her access badge had been remotely deactivated. She couldn't log into her email. Couldn't access any files. Couldn't even connect to the company Wi-Fi. As far as the system was concerned, she didn't exist anymore. Kyle passed her desk with 2 cups of coffee. He stopped. Hey, everything okay? She didn't answer. He shifted awkwardly. Look, I heard something about an audit. If you need me to vouch that you're cool, I don't mind. I mean, you've always seemed chill to me. She looked at him, her voice low and deliberate. You gave a presentation using a design I spent 3 years developing. And you never once mentioned my name. Kyle blinked. I thought it was open source or something. It was my thesis. Oh. He paused, then gave a sheepish half-smile. Well, you know how things move fast around here. He walked away without waiting for a reply. The theft of the prototype sent ripples through the company. Whispers multiplied. Brent took over all communications with the Artemis Project Board. Kyle was given temporary access authority while investigations were pending. And Nyla. She was reassigned on paper to an internal compliance task force. A placeholder, a box to hide her in. Her days were filled with reviewing outdated safety protocols, signing off on printer inventory, and sitting in silence as people avoided eye contact with her in the elevator. 2 days later, she received an unmarked envelope in her office mailbox. Inside was a single black and white printout, a zoomed-in security still. The grainy image showed the figure in the lab. It wasn't crystal clear. The face was shadowed, indistinct. But the posture was wrong. The build too broad. The walk unfamiliar. It wasn't her. And whoever sent it knew she'd see it. There was no note. No explanation. Just a clue. Someone wanted her to dig deeper. She waited until after hours. Access to the security office was tightly controlled, but she remembered something from orientation. The backup server room had its own storage cache of surveillance data, updated every 72 hours. Engineers had access for system testing. It was her last threat. She used an old master badge that Dr. Reyes had once loaned her during a system drill. and slipped into the server room. Inside, humming machines lined the walls like steel soldiers. She located the terminal, plugged in her flash drive, and navigated through the folders. Then she found it. Security Cam 4B 2025. She clicked. This version of the footage was longer, wider angle. She watched the figure break into the cabinet, and then it happened. As the person turned, their face briefly flickered into view under the overhead light. It wasn't just not her. It was Brent, wearing a lab coat with her name tag, holding a prototype container, glancing up just enough for the light to catch his jawline. Nyla's blood ran cold. She didn't know who had left the still image in her mailbox.
But someone inside Kepler Tech knew.
Someone else had seen it. She copied the full video onto her drive, encrypted it, and uploaded a backup to a secure cloud folder. As she prepared to leave the server room, she turned the corner and froze. Standing at the exit was Marla, the HR rep who had promised to circle back. She looked at the flash drive in Nyla's hand. I assume that's not part of the compliance assignment. Nyla's breath caught. I know who stole the prototype. Marla's expression didn't change. She stepped aside and opened the door. I suggest you be careful, Nyla. People don't like getting caught, especially the ones who write the rules. Back in her apartment, Nyla stared at the footage on loop. It was enough to ruin Brent, enough to trigger a federal audit, maybe even criminal charges. But she also knew what they would say. That it was grainy, that it was inconclusive, that Brent had no motive, and that she, the disgruntled diversity hire, fabricated it in revenge. Her word wouldn't be enough. She needed more. She needed a witness. The next morning she came into the office prepared to act. But when she opened her laptop to pull up the footage, her cloud folder was empty. Deleted. Her backup drive was corrupted. And her security camera file, gone. Someone had beaten her to it. But they missed one thing. She still had the printout. And in the blurry corner of the frame, a second figure stood just outside the lab door, half visible. Watch. The image haunted her. The shadowed figure in the corner of the security footage, neither fully in frame nor fully out, was her last lead. Nyla enlarged the image, pixel by pixel, but the figure's face remained just out of reach, like the truth itself. She printed it out anyway. Added it to the small folder she now carried everywhere. Inside, the grainy footage still of Brent, her revoked access logs, copies of her thesis, internal emails, a signed letter from Lockheed, receipts of a career stolen in slow motion. By Monday morning, she had made up her mind. She was going back to HR. Not to plead, but to document. Officially. In writing. Marla's office was glass-walled, modern, sterile. Everything about it, projected calm, plants that looked fake, a light diffuser pulsing in the corner, walls painted in a muted, corporate sage. Marla didn't smile when Nyla walked in. She only gestured toward the guest chair and pulled up a form on her screen. You said it was urgent? Nyla laid the folder on the desk. You need to open this, right now. Marla skimmed the pages, stopped at the still frame from the footage. Her brows knit for a half-second, then smoothed. You already showed me this. You didn't see it. Look closer. That's Brent. Wearing my lab coat, holding the prototype. Marla didn't look again. Instead, she leaned back, folded her hands neatly, and said, Let's take a breath. Nyla froze. I want to start by saying, we hear you, Marla continued, in a trained tone, half counselor, half lawyer. Your emotional experience matters to us. That said, we're concerned that your focus has become less about collaboration and more about confrontation. Nyla's stomach tightened. Are you saying I imagined a stolen prototype? We're saying that your interpretation, while valid to your experience, may not align with the intentions of others involved. You saw the footage, and others saw a stressed employee, possibly misidentifying someone in a lab coat. Marla smiled softly, which, as you know, is common, especially under pressure. Nyla blinked. So it's stress. Now I'm not a whistleblower. I'm a fragile woman under pressure. We've seen patterns of emotional distress, Marla offered gently. Your recent access issues, the late-night server room entry, the elevated concerns about plagiarism. Elevated concerns? Nyla scoffed. It's theft. Marla tilted her head. Have you considered speaking with one of our internal wellness consultants? We can schedule a few sessions. No stigma, just support. Nyla stood up. You're offering me therapy instead of accountability. We're offering you a path to thrive. Emotionally, not aggressively. The word hit like a slap. Aggressively. The magic word that makes black women disappear from boardrooms. A single syllable that turns intelligence into threat, boundaries into insubordination. She didn't respond, just walked out, folder under her arm, pulse thudding in her throat. That afternoon, her office phone rang. It was an automated message. You've been removed from Project Artemis Communications until further notice. Please direct any questions to H. Not even a human voice. Just a pre-recorded clip. She called Dr. Reyes again.
No answer.
She checked his internal profile. Deactivated. She checked the team board outside the lab. His photo was gone. In the hallway, Brent passed her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tough week? She didn't answer. He leaned closer. Maybe time to think about your future, Nyla. Not everything works out the way we want it to. Not everyone's built for this environment. She stared at him. Built for what? Theft? He laughed under his breath. Built for the real world. You're brilliant, no doubt. But some people just aren't a culture fit. There it was. The other magic phrase, culture fit. Corporate code for you make us uncomfortable when you speak the truth. Nyla went home that night with 1,000 thoughts clawing at her. She didn't eat. Didn't shower. Just stared at her ceiling, her mind replaying every moment. The missed credit. The stolen work. The whispered slurs. The sudden vanishing of her mentor. The hollow HR smile. And now therapy as a substitute for justice. It was all too intentional to be incompetence. This was a system designed to protect itself, not her. She stayed late the next night, long after most had left. She walked the halls of Kepler Tech like a ghost, silent, forgotten, unclaimed. At 9:13 p.m., she stepped into the garage. Only 2 cars remained. Hers was one of them. She noticed it from across the lot, something off about the sheen of the door. She walked closer. The words stopped her cold. Go back to Africa. Scratched deep into the driver's side with something sharp. Maybe a key, maybe a knife. The letters were uneven, but deliberate. No ambiguity, no interpretation, just hate. Bare and unmistakable. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone. She reported the vandalism to security. The guard looked bored. Yeah, we get stuff like this sometimes. Do the cameras cover this level? He shrugged. We can check, but sometimes the lighting isn't great. It's a threat, she said. It's racial harassment. The guard didn't even write it down. We'll file it with facilities. Someone will call you. Maybe tomorrow. Nyla drove home with the message still carved into her car. As the streetlights passed overhead, her mind raced through every time someone called her a diversity pick. Every smirk, every erasure, every stolen moment. And now it wasn't hidden. It was right there, in the open. She sat in her driveway for over an hour, hands still on the steering wheel, unable to move. Inside, her phone buzzed. An anonymous text. No name, no number, just a photo. A clear shot of the garage security feed, someone kneeling beside her car with a key. The face was slightly blurred, but not enough to hide the identity. It was Kyle. 3 days after she was escorted off-site, Nyla woke up to a silence that felt intentional. No emails, no calls, no press inquiries, no news from the board. The world hadn't noticed what she had risked. Not yet. She opened her laptop, refreshed her LinkedIn, expecting, maybe hoping for a flurry of connection requests, or even a message of solidarity from someone at Kepler Tech. Instead, her eyes locked onto something that made her chest tighten. Current position none. She blinked. Her job title was gone. Her employer field was blank. Her timeline now showed a career gap, beginning 3 months ago, the exact month she was hired. She clicked into her own profile history. There was no record of Kepler Tech listed at all. She hadn't been fired. She had been erased. Her fingers trembled as she opened Kepler Tech's public website. She typed her own name into the team directory search. Nothing. She navigated to the internal team portal, one she had memorized like a second home during her onboarding. Access denied. User not found. Not suspended. Not inactive. Gone. Like she had never existed. She flipped through her emails, looking for any record, offer letters, HR threads, team invites. Most were there, but the ones from Brent? Deleted, completely. No trace of her being assigned to Artemis X. No confirmation of her presentations. No credit, no trail. She wasn't just off the project. She was scrubbed from it. Nyla sat back in her chair, heart pounding. She tried to breathe, to slow the surge of rage and fear now coiling in her chest. Her thoughts jumped wildly, from sabotage, to whistleblower retaliation, to identity theft. But the truth was simpler and colder. They were making sure no one ever connected her name to the Artemis design. They hadn't just taken her work. They were taking her story. She emailed a former colleague, Taylor, a junior engineer who had once looked up to her, one of the few who had ever spoken to her like a peer. Hey, strange question. Can you still see my name listed in any of the Artemis version control archives? 15 minutes passed before the reply came. Nyla, I don't know what's happening, but your commits are gone. The files still exist, but the authorship chain has been wiped. It's like someone manually rewrote the contribution logs. I don't know how that's even possible. Then another message came in seconds later. Please don't respond to this, I can't be involved. Her hands shook. It wasn't just corporate politics anymore. It was a cover-up. She called her mother. For once, she didn't try to explain everything. She just said, "They're trying to delete me." Her mother, quiet for a moment, answered with a firmness that felt like home.
Then you better make yourself unforgettable.
Nyla's instincts took over. She started backing up every file she still had. Emails, timestamps, third-party submissions, even voicemails from vendors that referenced her contributions. Still, it felt like pieces of her identity were slipping through her fingers. Her laptop couldn't hold the enormity of what she'd built and lost. She reached for an old shoebox beneath her bed, one filled with cords, chargers, junk drives. That's when she found it. A matte black USB stick, unlabeled, thin, and dusty. She paused. It had been a gift from Dr. Reyes during her second week on the job. For overflow logs, he'd said casually. Some of the older lab systems auto-backup here when the main servers are slow. She had forgotten all about it. She plugged it into her laptop. It whirred quietly, like something waking up after months of silence. One folder blinked open. Lab Cam Archive. She opened it. Rows of video files populated the screen, each one timestamped. Some just minutes long, others spanning hours. She clicked the oldest file. Static. Then a view of the lab from the ceiling. Black coats, glowing screens, engineers moving with purpose. She skipped ahead to newer files. And then she saw it. Brent, alone in the lab at 2:40, wearing her coat, punching in override codes, removing the prototype, looking directly into the camera once. It was the clearest version yet, and it was on a drive no one knew existed. Her breath caught, but there was more. She clicked another file. This one labeled Internal Audio, Meeting Room A Cons 2025. The recording began mid-sentence. Brent's voice. It won't be a problem. We'll mark her unstable. Phase her out before the summit. Another male voice. Unfamiliar. Maybe legal. What about the board? They'll want documentation if she pushes back. We'll prep a termination path. Keep her name off everything in the system. By the time anyone asks questions, the narrative will already be clean. Silent.
Then, laughter.
Nyla covered her mouth. Not out of surprise, out of grief. Grief for what she'd hoped Kepler Tech could be. Grief for the trust she gave too freely. And grief for the realization that this wasn't just about her anymore. This was a system, a machine, and she had just found its blueprint. Suddenly her laptop pinged. New email, subject inquiry, regarding Dr. Nyla Carter. She opened it cautiously. It was from a woman named Samantha Dean, investigator with the National Aerospace Integrity Review Board. Dr. Carter, we've received your file. Your documentation is under internal review. One question, do you possess any independent video or audio confirming intentional misattribution of intellectual property? If so, please respond using the secure portal attached. We are watching closely.
SD.
Nyla stared at the screen, then at the USB in her hand. For the first time she realized she might have the one thing they couldn't erase. She reached for her phone to scan the secure portal code, but as she did, her screen lit up with a different notification. Unknown caller. No idea. She let it ring. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, she picked up. Silence. Then a slow, deliberate voice. You're playing a very dangerous game, Nyla. Click. She dropped the phone. The room felt smaller now, like the walls were learning how to breathe. But she didn't panic. She took the USB, inserted it into a clean burner laptop, and began encrypting the files with a military-grade algorithm she hadn't used since grad school. Because if they were watching her, then it was time for the world to start watching them. Nyla didn't sleep. The echoes of Brent's voice in the stairwell rang louder than any alarm clock. She lay on her back, staring at the cracked ceiling of her apartment like it held coordinates to a way out. She's not a threat anymore. That line repeated in her mind like a dare, like a challenge she wasn't supposed to hear. They had already begun burying her. Slowly. Strategically. And the only reason it hadn't worked was because she hadn't finished digging yet. At 3:22 a.m., she got out of bed. Her room was dim, lit only by the cold white light of her laptop screen. She sat cross-legged on the floor, folders scattered around her like pieces of a war map. Documents, printouts, photos, login logs, the last remaining evidence of her intellectual fingerprints. She connected her external hard drive, opened a blank Word document, and started writing. The whistleblower program was something she remembered from a university seminar, an anonymous submission portal set up by the National Aerospace Integrity Review Board. It had been established after a manufacturing scandal in 20. Most people forgot it existed, but Nyla didn't. She searched the deep web archives for the secure URL. Not public-facing, not indexed, the kind of portal only known to insiders and obsessives. She found it after an hour of scraping old STEM forums. When she opened the submission form, her screen turned black for a moment. Then white text appeared. Submit securely. One chance. No revisions. No retrieval. A single file upload box blinked on the screen. She compressed everything. Documents, logs, schematic overlays, audio clips she'd secretly recorded of passive-aggressive HR meetings, a stairwell photo of Brent wearing her lab coat, and the security shot of Kyle at her car. Then she wrote a cover letter. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't polished. But it was real. My name is Dr. Nyla Carter. I am the original creator of the Artemis X propulsion design. My work has been stolen, whitewashed, and repackaged by colleagues at Kepler Tech Aerospace. They intend to present it at the National Summit, without crediting or acknowledging my contribution. This is not just professional theft. It is systemic racial sabotage, enabled by silence and weaponized compliance. I am sending this not for revenge, but because the truth should not rely on who gets the microphone. The truth should stand on its own. Even if I don't. She hit upload. A soft chime. Then nothing. Just the blinking cursor. She closed her laptop and exhaled. For the first time in weeks, her lungs felt like they held air. When Nyla arrived at Kepler Tech the next morning, her steps were lighter. Not because she believed she'd won, but because she finally knew she wasn't waiting for permission anymore. Whatever happened next, at least the lie wouldn't go unchallenged. She swiped her badge at the main entrance. Red light. Access denied. She tried again. Same result. She looked up. 2 security officers were already walking toward her from the reception desk. One of them gestured politely. Dr. Carter, we need to ask you to come with us. They led her through the lobby. Eyes followed her, but no one spoke. No one intervened. She was walked past the glass-walled lab, where Kyle stood talking to Brent. Both men looked up as she passed. Kyle looked confused. Brent didn't. He looked pleased. They brought her to a holding room near the back of the building, small, windowless, fluorescent, cold. Marla from HR arrived 20 minutes later, clutching a folder that seemed more for show than purpose. She sat down across from Nyla. Effective immediately, you are being placed on administrative leave pending internal investigation. Nyla's throat tightened. For what? Marla maintained her professional tone. A report has been filed indicating inappropriate access to restricted files, unauthorized use of internal servers, and possible breach of data confidentiality. You mean whistleblowing? We don't make assumptions during investigations. You're trying to silence me. We're trying to ensure due process. Nyla laughed, sharp, bitter. You ignored every report I made, every complaint, every piece of evidence I brought to you. Marla didn't blink. This isn't personal, Nyla. It's procedural. Nyla leaned forward. You know what's personal? Watching my design get pitched by a guy who couldn't calculate thrust if his life depended on it. Being followed to my car. Getting labeled unstable because I wouldn't stay silent. Marla nodded like she was listening. But she wasn't. She was already closing the folder. We'll contact you when the investigation concludes. And if it doesn't go your way, Nyla asked, you'll just erase me quietly, right? Let Brent keep my patent. Let Kyle keep smiling in your diversity posters. Marla stood. The shuttle will take you home. Outside, a black town car was already waiting at the curb. Inside the vehicle, Nyla didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She just stared out the window as the building disappeared behind her. She thought about her mother, her professors, Dr. Lewis, everyone who told her she had to be twice as good. What they didn't say was that being twice as good still wasn't a seatbelt. It just made the crash quieter. When she got home, her inbox was already locked. Her Kepler Tech login expired. Her calendar wiped. Everything she'd built inside that company was gone in an instant. But they hadn't seen the real twist. Not yet. Because while Kepler Tech tried to frame her as unstable and disloyal, a quiet message was spreading behind the scenes through the encrypted back channels of the Aerospace Review Board.
That message wasn't coming from HR.
It was coming from the truth. That night, at 9:47 p.m., a text came in from a number she didn't recognize. Your file landed in the right hands. They're reviewing it now. Don't disappear. Attached was a screenshot of the portal's back-end dashboard. Status evidence verified. Under active review. Internal board escalation pending. The next morning, a new name appeared on Kepler Tech's internal legal distribution list. A name no one expected. James L. Connors, lead investigator, Aerospace Fraud Division, NA. The man who led the investigation that dismantled Orion Space in Brent saw it first. And for the first time since this began, he looked afraid. Nyla stared at the photo on her phone for what felt like hours. The grainy image of Kyle crouched beside her car, key in hand, was undeniable. The timestamp aligned with the moment she left the building. There was no defense he could invent, no joke he could twist. This wasn't a mistake. It was targeted, calculated, but the message it carried was even colder than the scratch itself. You are not safe. And we know you know it. By morning, she had filed an official report with security, attaching the photo. But once again, the system leaned into indifference. No confirmation. No follow-up. No security call. Kyle passed her in the hallway that afternoon with a casual nod, sipping a smoothie like nothing had happened. He knew. He knew she couldn't touch him. Nyla needed guidance. Not from HR. Not from colleagues too afraid to speak. She needed someone who had been through it. Someone who had carved a path in rooms like this when they were even colder. She needed Dr. Julius Lewis. To the world, he was a legend. The first black mission director at NASA, the man behind the Mars lander program. To her, he was more. He was the mentor who'd once read her scholarship essay and called her the kind of girl the stars were waiting for. She emailed him. The subject line was simple. Need to talk. He replied within the hour. They met in a quiet booth at a cafe near Johnson Space Center. It was late, the lighting soft, the kind of place meant for serious conversations disguised as casual lunches. Dr. Lewis looked the same as always. Gray slacks, linen shirt, that quiet calm that made people lean in when he spoke. His eyes lit up when he saw her.
Miss Carter? He said, standing to hug her. Still making the earth spin?
She tried to smile. Barely, she whispered. He noticed the crack in her voice. His expression softened. They sat. She told him everything, from the stolen design to the demotions, the access revokes, the racial slurs dressed up as jokes, the vandalism, the photo of Kyle. Dr. Lewis didn't interrupt. He sipped his coffee slowly, hands folded. When she finished, her voice trembling with exhaustion, she looked at him like a drowning person looking for land. And then he laughed. Not mockingly, not cruelly, but the sound still gutted her. A short, sad chuckle. Is that all? He asked, tilting his head. Nyla blinked. I'm sorry. He leaned forward. Let me tell you what happened to me. My second year at NASA. I walked into a lab I helped design and found a white engineer had replaced my name on the patent draft. You know what they said when I complained? That I should be grateful I was allowed in the building. He paused. So when I say this, I say it with love. Nyla felt the moment freeze before he even spoke the next words. Be twice as good, girl. That's the cost of entry. Her breath caught. Dr. Lewis kept going. You can cry. You can be angry. But if you let them see you fold, they win. If you're a problem, they'll erase you. But if you're exceptional, undeniable, they'll have to carry you whether they like it or not. Her voice cracked. So I should accept it? The theft? The slurs? Being erased? He looked at her like a father speaking hard truth. You don't get to fight the system and expect it to hand you flowers. You fight by staying in it. Long enough to beat them with your brilliance. Nyla walked out of the cafe numb. She didn't argue, didn't shout. She just nodded, thanked him, and left. But inside, something fractured. Dr. Lewis wasn't a villain. He was a survivor. And like many survivors, he'd learned to live inside the system by becoming part of its silence. But Nyla hadn't spent her life dreaming of reaching the stars just to survive. She hadn't sacrificed everything to just endure. She wanted more than survival. She wanted truth. She wanted justice. She wanted her name. That afternoon, she returned to Kepler Tech with the weight of disappointment stitched into her chest. Her steps slower, her shoulders lower. She didn't go to her desk. Instead, she wandered toward the stairwell on the east wing. It was rarely used, too far from the labs, and she needed a place to be invisible. She slumped down on the third step, folder clutched in her lap, eyes burning. No tears had fallen yet, but they were coming. She bit her lip, dug her nails into her palm, tried to breathe through the tightness in her chest. Be twice as good. They'll erase you. Culture fit. Quota. Aggressive. The words swirled in her head like knives. And then she heard voices. 2 floors up. Faint. Male. Confident. Her breath stilled. She recognized one instantly. Brent. The second was Kyle. She pressed back into the wall, just below the bend of the stairs, heart hammering. Their words floated down. So the presentation's set for the National Summit next month.
Dude, I can't believe I get to pitch the laser design. I barely understand half the math.
Brent laughed. Doesn't matter. You look the part. And you're white enough to sell it. Kyle chuckled. What about her? Nyla? There was a pause. Brent replied casually. She's done. HR's labeling her emotionally unstable. We're already preparing the offboarding paperwork. Kyle whistled. Damn. Brent continued. You deliver this clean, and the board won't care whose name was on the original paper. They'll remember yours. It's about optics, not origin. Nyla's stomach twisted. Besides, Brent added, we scrubbed all her versions from the system. As far as anyone knows, you built this from scratch. Kyle's voice lowered. Should we be worried about that photo? There was silence. Then Brent's voice again. Cold, calculated. She's outnumbered. They'll paint her as angry, paranoid. Maybe even unstable. He paused. She's not a threat anymore. Nyla sat frozen on the stair, every muscle locked. The tears finally came, but not from sadness. They came from fury. They were about to pitch her stolen work at the National Aerospace Tech Summit, a platform with government funding, international eyes, and career-defining consequences. And her name, her genius, would never be mentioned. She looked down at the printout in her lap. The photo, the proof, the last remaining fragment they hadn't erased. She stood up, wiped her face with her sleeve, and walked back toward the lab. She didn't know how yet, but she was going to make sure every single person in that summit room knew the truth.
Nyla didn't sleep.
She sat at her kitchen table, the encrypted files loading slowly into the secure portal. Her burner laptop hummed quietly as lines of code danced across the screen, encoding her last fragments of truth, like a digital heartbeat. Each click was a reclaiming, a refusal to vanish. By 2:11 a.m., everything had been uploaded. Her schematic, the lab camera footage, audio of Brent's stairwell confession, and now the final piece. A recording from a day the world had forgotten, but her body never did. The file was labeled Archive 4B Internal Audio Cont Mic 7. A mic meant to pick up test conversations inside Lab 4B. It wasn't meant for surveillance, but for syncing audio during prototype simulations. But what it captured instead was far uglier. She hit play. The speakers cracked faintly, then cleared. Brent's voice, sarcastic, careless, arrogant. She keeps talking about how she designed the dispersal timing. I mean, come on. We all know what this is. Optics. DEI fluff. She doesn't even write clean code. A second voice, someone from the team, chimed in. You think she'll figure out the shift and attribution logs? Please, Brent said, chuckling. I replaced her name line by line. She wouldn't know Git if it hit her. Then another engineer, laughing. She asked about the heat cap model again. I told her that's not your job, black girl. Thought she was gonna cry. The group laughed. Long, loud, and worst of all, comfortable. As if nothing about it required correction. As if this was just how men talked in rooms where women like her weren't supposed to be. Nyla paused the recording. Her jaw tightened, hands trembling against the cool edge of her laptop. It wasn't just professional sabotage. It was subtle, smiling, dressed in khakis and lab coats. But hate nonetheless. This wasn't about intellectual disagreement. It wasn't about qualification. It was about who they believed deserved to be seen as brilliant, and who didn't. She added the audio file to the evidence folder and uploaded it to the National Aerospace Integrity Board's secure portal. But something in her gut told her it wasn't enough. The public still didn't know. The people who couldn't be silenced, other black women in STEM, young engineers, teachers, students who still believed the system could be fixed. They deserved to hear it too. She opened a private Vimeo account, uploaded the clip with a simple title. This is what it sounds like in the rooms you're not supposed to be in. She didn't include names, didn't include the company, just the audio. Unfiltered, undeniable. Then she sent the link to exactly 6 people. A tech journalist who once wrote about the illusion of inclusion in aerospace. A black female rocket scientist who had gone viral last year for calling out racial bias in her promotion delays. A civil rights lawyer specializing in whistleblower cases. Her old physics professor. A YouTuber who exposed corporate discrimination anonymously. And finally, the entire board of directors at Kepler Tech. She didn't add context. Just a single sentence. I was in the room when they erased me. You deserve to hear how. By morning the file had over 80,000 views. Retweets stacked by the hundreds. Screenshots from the video bounced between group chats, forums and Discord servers like wildfire. Hashtags emerged. Black brains matter. Not your job. Black girl. Erased by design. And then came the inevitable. Kepler Tech's legal team filed a takedown. Claimed the audio was edited, inauthentic, misleading. By 10:14 a.m., the video was pulled from Vimeo. YouTube followed. Twitter flagged it as potential AI-generated content. Reddit threads were locked. Nyla's account was suspended, pending review for misinformation. And just like that, the truth was once again under investigation. But what Nyla didn't expect was how fast they'd move against her personally. At 12:03 p.m., she received a letter from Kepler Tech's legal office. You are hereby notified that the company is pursuing civil action for breach of confidentiality, distribution of proprietary materials, and defamation. You are ordered to cease and desist from any further sharing or discussion of privileged internal conversations. The signature at the bottom? Brent Holloway, Senior Systems Engineer, Interim Project Lead. She sat back, blinking in disbelief. They weren't just denying the recording, they were suing her for telling the truth. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Didn't we tell you this wasn't your job? She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She opened her burner laptop again. Replayed the clip. Let it echo through her small apartment, like a battle hymn. And then she noticed something she'd missed before. At the end of the tape, just before the laughter faded out, there was a sharp mechanical click. Then a voice she hadn't heard until now. Dr. Reyes.
You're all fools if you think this won't blow up in your face.
If she goes public, I won't protect any of you. The laughter stopped. One of the engineers scoffed. What are you gonna do? They already put you out to pasture. Reyes didn't respond. But now Nyla knew. He had been in the room. He had heard it all. He hadn't stopped it. But maybe, just maybe, he had saved a copy. Or something more. She opened her inbox and began drafting one final email. To Aerospace Reg Board, Secure Don Narb. Subject, one last voice you need to hear. She attached the enhanced clip. Reyes' voice loud and clear. Then she wrote, they buried me. But he was there. And he knew. If he's still alive, someone needs to ask why he disappeared. She hovered over the send button.
And click.
30 minutes later, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail from a blocked number. She pressed play. A gruff voice. One she didn't recognize. You really think uploading some tapes makes you safe? You should have just stayed in your lane. Enjoy the show. You're not done yet. Nyla hadn't opened her old college email in over a year. But that morning, after the voicemail, after the lawsuit threat, after the takedown, after the chilling final message that rang like a dare, she found herself typing in the long unused login to her university's alumni portal. Maybe out of impulse, maybe desperation. She wasn't sure what she expected. A familiar memory, a scholarship update, a newsletter. What she found was a single unread email. Subject, you built stars in my classroom. Don't let them bury that. It was from Professor Eloise Monroe. Professor Monroe had been her first real believer. In a classroom of bored Ivy kids who thought engineering was just a step on their way to venture capital or consulting jobs, Monroe had seen something different in Nyla. Not just aptitude, but obsession. A hunger. The way Nyla stayed after class to ask about microburst dynamics. The way she'd built a vacuum chamber model in her dorm closet, just to test thermal drift. Monroe once told her, You don't study aerospace. You breathe it. And Nyla never forgot that. The email was short, direct, and laced with quiet rage. Nyla, I saw the video before it got pulled. And then I saw the lawsuit. I knew the game was rigged. But I didn't realize they'd bring the guillotine for you. I still have friends in high places. The kind of places where code can't be deleted. If you're ready to work again, I have a seat for you. Not a desk. A seat. Call me. Nyla called. Professor Monroe picked up on the first ring. She didn't waste time. I'm consulting for NASA again, Monroe said. Advising on the Altair initiative. Deep space propulsion. They just axed a contractor who overpromised and underdelivered. Silence. Then, they need a new system lead. Nyla's breath hitched. They're not going to care about the lawsuit? She asked cautiously. They don't even know yet, Monroe replied. But I do. And I'll go to war for you. Nyla blinked hard, fighting the sting behind her eyes. Why? Because I remember what you were before they tried to break you. And because I'm tired of watching brilliance get buried by mediocre men with better PR. 2 days later, she was on a red-eye to Houston. The NASA campus was quiet that morning. Sky washed in soft gray, the kind of dawn that made everything look both heavy and full of possibility. Monroe met her at the gate, holding 2 coffees and a badge that read, Dr. Nyla Carter, Altair Division, Temp Access Pending Clearance. You're not in yet, Monroe said gently. But you're at the table. Nyla sipped the coffee, the steam warming her face. That's more than I've had in weeks. The next hours were a blur of security briefings, NDAs, fingerprint scans, and quiet introductions in long echoing corridors. Monroe didn't leave her side once. At noon, they sat in front of a massive curved display in a private tech chamber. Displayed on it, a propulsion schematic. Nyla's eyes widened. It was her design. Not the scrubbed version. Not Kyle's knockoff. Hers. Thermal dispersal curves. Fuel chamber layout. The laser timing algorithm she'd spent 2 summers optimizing. How did you get this? Nyla whispered. I archived your thesis before Kepler Tech wiped it. Monroe said simply. I've been pitching it for a year. They didn't want to listen. Now they're desperate. Nyla turned slowly to her. What's the catch? Monroe gave a tired smile. You'll have to present it. In full. Live. On broadcast. Next week. Nyla froze. Broadcast to who? NASA board. Federal contractors. Congressional budget analysts. And yes, some uninvited guests. Monroe held her gaze. Kepler Tech was invited to present their version of Artemis propulsion. The same summit Brent and Kyle are prepping for. We're countering it. With you. Nyla's throat dried instantly. Monroe continued. We're not playing nice. We're going to burn their version to the ground. That night, Nyla sat in her new dorm, at the NASA guest complex, bare bones but clean. A small cot, white sheets, a wall panel blinking quietly with a welcome message. She hadn't felt this close to herself in weeks. Still, she stared at the tablet in her lap, slides half prepared, diagrams waiting for life, and felt something heavier than fear. Responsibility. Because now it wasn't just about the stolen work. It was about the thousands of people who saw that video. The ones who sent her messages with hashtags like, she designed that. Who wrote things like, I left STEM because of what happened to women like her. She couldn't afford to just win. She had to prove that what they tried to erase still had gravity, still had mass. The next morning, she walked into the Altair conference room early. Monroe was already there, standing in front of a massive whiteboard, marker in hand. Don't just tell them your design works, Monroe said. Show them why it couldn't have come from anyone else. Nyla stepped up, heart pounding. Monroe passed her the marker. Let's remind them what genius looks like. 2 hours into their prep session, the door opened. A NASA director entered, followed by a summit coordinator. They both looked tense. Monroe stepped forward. What's going on? The coordinator swallowed. Kepler Tech just updated their summit roster. Nyla's chest tightened. They're sending a co-lead to counterbalance Kyle's technical pitch. Monroe raised an eyebrow. And the coordinator looked at Nyla. It's Brent. Nyla didn't move, didn't flinch, but her pulse rang in her ears like a warning siren. Monroe muttered, cowards. They're trying to reclaim the narrative. The coordinator handed them both a digital schedule. Nyla scanned the timeline. 10:30 a.m., Panel 2A, Kepler Tech Propulsion Innovation. 10:50 a.m., Panel 2B, NASA Altair Initiative, Comparative Modeling. Presenters Dr. Nyla Carter, Professor Eloise Monroe. 2 slots. Head to head. Live broadcast. Side by side. Monroe closed the tablet. You still want this? Nyla looked up, her voice steady. I need this. Monroe nodded slowly. Then we finish the prep. We go to that summit. And we make them regret ever underestimating you. That night, Nyla walked the perimeter of the complex. The stars above Houston blinked through a veil of clouds. For once, she wasn't afraid of what was coming. She was preparing for war with proof, with presence, and with purpose. She had made it back to the table. And this time, the room wouldn't silence her. But as she returned to her room, her tablet buzzed with a message that turned her blood cold. Urgent, your Kepler Tech security file was leaked. They're circulating a forged incident report to discredit you before the summit. Attached was a document. Falsified timestamps, fake quotes about insubordination. A signature that looked exactly like hers, but wasn't. And a subject line meant to destroy her, before she ever stepped on stage. Dr. Nyla Carter, mental instability and security risk profile. The morning of the summit arrived, wrapped in thick Texas heat and heavier silence. Nyla stood backstage, gripping her tablet like a lifeline. Her palms were slick, her jaw tight. She hadn't slept, not since reading the forged incident report. Kepler Tech was circulating, subtle enough to be believable, damning enough to discredit her completely. Security risk, emotional instability, non-compliant with team protocols, words meant to hollow her out. Professor Monroe stood beside her, arms crossed, watching, waiting. You don't have to prove you belong here, she said softly. You just have to prove the work does. Nyla looked at her. They'll come for both. Monroe gave a bitter smile. Then they'd better bring more than forged memos. At 10:28 a.m., the lights dimmed. A moderator stepped on stage and introduced Panel 2A, Kepler Tech Propulsion Innovations. Brent strode out in a crisp navy suit, polished, smug. Kyle followed 2 steps behind, clutching a stack of note cards. The screen behind them flickered to life with mock-ups of the Artemis propulsion chamber. Brent opened with a rehearsed speech about modular innovation and generational excellence. Kyle stumbled through a few talking points about fuel flow algorithms, his voice cracking slightly. Nyla stood backstage, hearing her own research reframed in clumsy, diluted language. Her stomach twisted. Then came the kicker. Brent gestured at the screen. We've been testing this new dispersal method, nicknamed the Holloway curve, in honor of our propulsion team's structural breakthrough. Nyla blinked. He named her algorithm after himself. Applause followed. Murmured approval. Brent bowed his head modestly, though the gleam in his eye betrayed satisfaction. He knew she was watching. He wanted her to. At 10:50 it was her turn. The moderator introduced her name. Tentative. Almost unsure. Next we welcome Dr. Nyla Carter, presenting NASA's Altair Comparative Propulsion Model, co-led with Professor Eloise Monroe. The lights changed. Nyla stepped forward. The room shifted. Even from the stage, she could feel it, curiosity mixed with skepticism. A black woman with no corporate title, no corporate logo, no smile, just data. She adjusted the mic. No opening speech, she said. Just proof. She tapped her tablet. The massive screen behind her came to life with her propulsion schematic, rendered in high-resolution layers, each module unfolding like a time-lapse bloom. She began to speak. The room went quiet. Every phrase hit like a blueprint being rediscovered in real time. She walked them through the flaws in Kepler Tech's Holloway curve, demonstrating thermal instability under vacuum simulations, the lack of redundancy in fuel looping, and the downstream effect on flight stabilization. She didn't use jargon. She used math. Unflinching, crisp, controlled. Then she did what no one expected. She pulled up the original timeline of the research, from her MIT thesis, dated 2 years before she ever set foot in Kepler Tech. Each file stamped, each model sourced, each development tracked with her name in the metadata. She didn't say Brent's name once. She didn't have to. The audience already knew. And then, with a final slide, she triggered the twist. Before I close, I want to show you something. The screen shifted.
A video played.
The lab. Brent, wearing her coat, holding the prototype, looking into the camera. She let the clip run in silence. Then came the audio. His voice. His laughter. The line that echoed through every inch of the auditorium. She asked about the heat cap model again. I told her, "That's not your job, black girl." Silence. Absolute silence. The room held its breath. Then she closed the file and turned to face them. NASA didn't just hire me to rebuild a design. They hired me because they still believe in merit. And because they believe the future of aerospace won't be built by erasing the people who dream it. Applause began, slow at first, then louder. A few people stood. In the front row, Brent's face was stone. Kyle looked like he wanted to disappear. And just as Nyla began to breathe again, a new voice cut through the noise. Firm. Male. Authoritative. Dr. Carter. She turned. A woman had stood up in the third row. Gray suit. Congressional pin on her lapel. Senator Louise Hartwell, one of the summit's keynote speakers. The crowd fell silent again. Senator Hartwell spoke clearly, eyes trained on Nyla.
Is it true?
She asked. That you were terminated from Kepler Tech for non-compliance and labeled emotionally unstable in an internal report. Gasps. Murmured. Nyla's heart clenched. Professor Monroe stepped forward, but Nyla held out a hand. She stared at the senator, voice unwavering. I was labeled unstable after I refused to stay silent about stolen work. The senator raised an eyebrow. Do you deny there's an incident report in circulation that paints you as a security risk? I don't deny they forged one. And do you have proof of that? Nyla hesitated. I do. The senator nodded slowly. Then I suggest you show it now. Nyla reached for her tablet, but the screen was black, flickering, frozen. Her backup drive in her bag buzzed, overheating. She stared down. Everything had gone dark. Nyla's fingers tapped frantically at her tablet, sweat forming beneath her collar.
Nothing.
The screen remained frozen. The audience sat in electric silence, waiting for the proof. The reveal. The final undoing. Instead, her presentation system glitched like someone had triggered a kill switch from somewhere backstage. The Kepler Tech team watched with bated smugness. Brent leaned back with folded arms. Kyle's leg bounced under the table. Neither looked surprised, but Nyla didn't panic. She raised her eyes and said calmly, "My tech may be jammed, but I'm not." Then she reached for her bag, pulled out a single printed photo, and held it up above the podium. The grainy lab still. Brent. The prototype. Her name tag on his coat. The room zoomed in, journalists snapping pictures, audience members whispering. And then Nyla spoke clearly, without slides, without notes. They didn't just steal from me, they designed a system to erase me. But systems break. People remember. She paused. I am not your janitor. I am not your diversity token. I am the brain behind the breakthrough. Then she stepped back from the mic, and the room erupted. By the time she stepped outside, her name had already hit trending status. Give Nyla credit. She built that.
Nyla Carter.
Clips of her final statement spread like wildfire. On TikTok, Twitter, STEM blogs, academic Slack channels, and professional newsletters. Even CNN ran a special engineer reclaims credit in viral NASA summit showdown. Brent went silent. So did Kepler Tech. Their PR department released a statement within hours. Carefully crafted. Kepler Tech stands firmly against all forms of discrimination and is conducting an internal review. We remain committed to transparency and innovation. But it was already too late. Because someone had uploaded Nyla's lab footage to a mirror site in Iceland, fully encrypted, publicly hosted, impossible to take down. It wasn't just about intellectual theft anymore. It was about who gets to be called brilliant, and who doesn't. The next morning, Nyla woke up to an inbox full of interview requests. BBC, MIT Tech Review, Bloomberg, Ebony. But one message stood out above them all. Subject: revoking Mr. Holloway's nomination. It was from the International Aerospace Council. Brent's nomination for Innovator of the Year was officially rescinded, citing ethical inconsistencies under review. Nyla stared at the email, letting the words sit. The award he'd renamed her design for? Gone. At NASA, things moved quickly. She wasn't a temporary consultant anymore. Her badge was updated to full clearance. Her name was added to internal emails as Lead Propulsion Systems Analyst, Altair Initiative. She had a team, a desk, a window. Monroe hugged her in the hallway. About time the world caught up. But even in that victory, Nyla knew the story wasn't over. The viral energy had ignited something far larger than her name. Now it was about what came next. On day 3 of the trending wave, something unexpected broke. A Reddit thread, posted by a burner account. A Kepler leaks. I work in Kepler Tech's internal DevOps team. I know what they did. I can't stay silent anymore. Here's the real chat log. Attached was a zip file. Inside, screenshots of internal Slack messages between Brent, Kyle, and 4 senior executives. The messages were timestamped 2 weeks before Nyla's suspension. They joked about deleting her Git access before she figures out how it works, scrubbing her name from the meeting logs just to see if she notices, telling HR she's aggressive. Nothing gets a black woman out faster than the unhinged label, and worst of all, if she pushes back, we'll drop something in her file. Mental instability, family trauma. Whatever, just keep it subtle.
Then came the word no one could unsee.
A regional VP had written,
Not worried. You know how these NES are. Loud at first. Quiet after a check clears.
that single screenshot detonated online. Kepler Tech went from under review to under fire. By noon, 5 corporate sponsors pulled out. 3 federal grants were frozen pending investigation. And Senator Hartwell issued a public statement. Dr. Nyla Carter represents the kind of leadership, brilliance, and resilience America should stand behind. We will be requesting a full congressional ethics review into Kepler Tech's practices. A lawyer representing multiple former black employees of the company announced a joint class action suit, citing racial discrimination, intellectual theft, and hostile workplace culture. Nyla stayed quiet through it all. No press tour, no celebratory videos, no merch drops. She worked, every day, on the propulsion project, on the real thing that brought her into the room before all this. Because she knew going viral was easy. Staying visible on her own terms was the real fight. But late that night, as she reviewed updated designs in the dim light of her NASA dorm, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It read, "They lost. But we didn't forget who you were before this." Attached was a link. It was a 4-minute audio file, a private Zoom recording, one of Kepler Tech's executive roundtables. She hit play. Voices, casual. Then someone, Brent, clearly spoke. "She played us. Whole country fell for it. But we had a plan, man. We were this close." Another exec. "What if she leaks more?" Brent replied, "Let her. There's nothing left. We scrubbed her original timestamps, erased her backups, even planted those counseling records." Then someone else laughed. "Yeah, let's not forget the Africa thing. Classic move. She wanted smoke. Now she's on fire." The call ended in a joke. Nyla would never forget. Too bad we can't erase her from history. Just her file. Nyla stared at the screen. It wasn't just ego. It was a deliberate campaign. A calculated system of digital violence. They hadn't just tried to discredit her. They tried to program her out of existence. And now the receipts were in her hands. The final proof. The kind that couldn't be denied. She forwarded the file to her legal team. Then to the investigative committee. Then, without a word, she posted the transcript redacted, but undeniable on her verified LinkedIn, with one line. "Here's what happens when you call a black woman a janitor. And she turns out to be the architect." The comments exploded. But Nyla didn't stay to watch. She powered down her phone, opened a fresh schematic, and began to write. Because her next move wouldn't be reactive. It would be revolutionary. And the world was finally ready to follow. But then her email chimed. Subject line. "Urgent internal memo, Reyes named in bribery probe." Nyla read the subject line again. "Urgent internal memo. Reyes named in bribery probe." Her hands hovered over the keyboard. But she didn't open the file right away. The ache in her chest wasn't just disbelief. It was a deeper wound. The kind that forms when someone you trusted becomes another lesson in survival. Dr. Reyes, the man who handed her her first badge. The only one who for a moment had stood in the doorway of the boys' club and gestured for her to come in. Now caught in the crossfire of an ethics investigation. According to the internal memo, Reyes had been paid to suppress whistleblower activity from inside Kepler Tech's engineering team. Payments rerouted through a shell consulting firm tied to one of the execs named in the chat logs. His abrupt resignation, not medical, not personal, strategic. Nyla didn't cry. Not this time. She just leaned back in her NASA-issued chair and whispered, "Of course," because even the ones who opened the door sometimes held it just long enough to say they tried. The legal fallout from the leaked audio came fast. A congressional committee issued subpoenas. A federal probe was opened. And 1 week after the summit, Nyla received a formal offer from Kepler Tech's legal counsel. The subject line was colder than steel. Proposed settlement, 2.5 million, mutual non-disclosure, no admission of fault. They wanted to bury it. Erase the final chapter. Hand her a check large enough to buy silence. But not justice. Nyla didn't even hesitate. She declined. No counter. No statement. No leverage play. Just a single sentence in her email reply. I'm not here to balance books. I'm here to rewrite the record. The offers poured in after that. Universities wanted her to keynote. Tech firms offered advisory roles. Government agencies flirted with appointment. Even a major publishing house reached out for a memoir. But Nyla wasn't interested in being a token or a trend. She'd lived what happened when the world needed a symbol more than it wanted the truth. So she chose something quieter, something bigger. She founded the Carter Initiative, a STEM pipeline program designed for Black girls in high school, offering fully funded lab residencies, mentorship pairings, and access to real aerospace tech. It launched with $50,000 of her own speaking honorariums. No angel investors. No VC firm photo ops. Just a clear mission. Not just to put Black girls in the room, but to make sure they know they were always supposed to be there. The first cohort was only 12 students, but they came from Mississippi, Detroit, the south side of Chicago, and a school district in Florida that hadn't funded a science lab in 8 years. When they arrived, she didn't start with equations. She started with a story. Not hers, but the one told about her. She played the audio, the laughter, the slurs, the lines they thought would define her. Then she said, "This is what they said when they thought no one was listening. You don't owe this world silence. You owe it your brilliance." One of the girls wept. Another asked to hold the schematic. Another asked if she could frame it. Professor Monroe called her the night the second grant came through. "You're building a new kind of legacy." Nyla smiled. "I'm just building something no one can erase." Monroe paused. "You've already done that." But with every interview and speaking engagement came one repeated request. "Can we tell your full story?" Journalists wanted exclusives. Filmmakers wanted rights. Activists wanted endorsements. Because once a story is out of your hands, people edit it.
They simplify it.
They make it palatable. And what happened to Nyla was not palatable. It was real, uncomfortable, instructive. But then a letter arrived, typed, mailed, not emailed, from a small independent documentary studio based in Oakland, run by 3 Black women, all former engineers who'd left Silicon Valley after years of burnout and bias. The opening lines stopped her cold. "We know what it's like to walk into a room with a genius idea and have someone hand you a mop. They didn't ask for the footage. They asked for trust." Nyla agreed. The project had no studio deal, no marketing arm, no guaranteed distribution. But it had integrity. But there was one thing they still hadn't captured. The original lab footage. The one no one outside a classified folder had seen in full. The one that showed not just Brent stealing the prototype, but the full 30 minutes before and after. The footage that captured Nyla staying after hours, cleaning up after others, sketching fuel dispersal patterns on a whiteboard no one ever read. The footage that showed her brilliance long before she was ever believed. And when the team asked if she still had it, Nyla hesitated. Not because she didn't, but because she wasn't sure if the world was ready to see how small they tried to make her, how easy it had been for them to ignore her. But then she looked at the 12 girls in her STEM cohort, now back in their home cities, FaceTiming her with stories about failing their first lab quiz, but acing the next one. She looked at her own nameplate on her NASA door. And then she opened her encrypted archive, copied the footage to a drive, and handed it over. "You can use this," she said, "but don't tell a redemption story."
The director looked confused. "Why not?"
Nyla's voice was steady. "Because I was always enough. The world just needed to catch up." A week later, the production team uploaded a teaser. It was simple. Just Nyla sitting in an empty lab, overlaid with one line of voiceover. "They called me just a janitor, but I was designing rockets after I wiped the floor." Then came the date. Documentary release. This fall. And under it, a final shot. The prototype. Her initials etched in the corner.
Let's see.
Proof. Not for them. For history. But as the teaser began to trend, Nyla received a flagged alert from her encrypted archive. Unauthorized access attempt detected. IP trace origin, Kepler Tech Server 11. 1 year to the day. That's how long it had been since Nyla Carter stood on stage with a frozen tablet, a single printout in her hand, and the weight of erasure on her back. Now she stood beneath the golden lights of the Kennedy Space Center's Hall of Honor, this time with her name etched into the evening's program. Recipient, the Artemis Medal for Aerospace Innovation. Dr. Nyla Carter, Altair Propulsion Architect, NASA. The crowd sat in hushed reverence, an audience of decision-makers, scientists, educators, and students. It wasn't a press stunt. It wasn't a pity invite. It was history, a long-delayed moment finally arriving on time. Nyla had considered skipping it. The attention, the speeches, the ceremonial smile. She didn't care for applause anymore. But then her mother called her that morning. "I found something," she said, voice trembling with quiet pride. Nyla turned around to see her mother standing in the hotel lobby, holding a tattered piece of paper encased in plastic. A drawing, crayon sketched, rough and hopeful, a black girl in a spacesuit, reaching toward a rocket, marked with crooked letters, NYLA's ship. Nyla blinked hard, throat tight. "I thought I lost this," her mother whispered, but maybe it was waiting for tonight. When Nyla stepped onto the stage to receive the medal, the room rose to its feet. Not fast, not performative, but slow, collective, and honest. Some clapped with reverence, others with something close to regret. She took the podium, metal gleaming around her neck. Her voice was steady, but quiet, more powerful for its restraint. "I was told the system worked. I was told that if I kept my head down and proved myself, I'd be seen." She paused. "I wasn't, not at first." She looked into the crowd, eyes sweeping over the senators, the students, the young black girls in front row seats, wearing mock flight suits. But I kept building, even when they called me angry, even when they labeled me unstable, even when they stole from me. Another pause. My revenge was never about punishing them. It was about building something that would outlast them. She gestured toward the back of the auditorium, where the first cohort of the Carter Initiative sat, hands clasped together. And now, the future doesn't look like the past. It looks like them. As she stepped off stage, her mother stood, tears rolling silently, that childhood drawing clutched against her chest. The applause didn't stop. It grew louder. Wave after wave. Not a roar of spectacle, but a rhythm of something repaired. Late? Yes, but finally right. Backstage, Professor Monroe embraced her. "That," she said, "was the speech I've waited my whole career to hear." Nyla smiled softly. "It wasn't for them." "Then who?" "For the girl who drew the rocket," Nyla said. "Before the world taught her to doubt she belonged near one." The post-ceremony mingling was polite. Press-lined, glittered with congratulations and handshakes. Nyla moved through it gracefully, though her mind was already drifting toward her next cohort, the propulsion refinements waiting on her desk, the girls who emailed her every week with questions about entry points, code errors, and career maps. Then, in the reception line, a young woman approached, barely 20, maybe younger. Slim frame, khakis, Kepler Tech lanyard swinging around her neck. "Dr. Carter?" Nyla turned, cautious but open. "I'm Jessa," the girl said, offering a nervous smile. "I'm an intern at Kepler Tech." Nyla nodded. "What can I do for you?" Jessa glanced around, nervous, unsure. Then she leaned closer and whispered, "They're still doing it." Or snap. The words hit like a low tremor. Nyla's expression didn't change, but something in her chest, something fragile and quiet, cracked again. Jessa continued, her voice barely above breath. "They didn't learn anything. They just got sneakier. Fake promotions, ghost projects. They use NDAs as punishment now. And they told us not to say your name." Nyla nodded once, absorbing it. "Why are you telling me this?" Jessa swallowed. "Because your story was the only reason I applied. And now I don't know if staying means becoming one of them." Silence hung heavy between them. Then Nyla reached into her bag and pulled out a small pin shaped like a silver rocket, stamped with the Carter Initiative crest. She pressed it into Jessa's hand. "You're not alone. But what if I can't fight them like you did?" Nyla met her eyes, steady and warm. "Then don't fight them alone." Jessa nodded, blinking back emotion. She slipped the pin into her coat pocket like it was a secret weapon. Then she disappeared into the crowd, back toward the people who still hadn't learned that truth doesn't die, it just waits. Later that night, Nyla stood on the hotel balcony, watching the lights of Cape Canaveral blink against the ocean's edge. The Artemis medal glinted softly against her chest. She thought of the email alert, the IP breach from Kepler Tech. Someone still digging, still trying to claw back what had already escaped. She wasn't afraid, but she was ready for whatever came next, because the applause wasn't the end. It was just the proof. But as she turned back inside, her phone buzzed again. A text. No name, just a number. Tomorrow. Supreme Court records. Riaz flipped, The courthouse smelled sterile like polished marble and unfinished paperwork. The ceiling stretched high, the walls lined with plaques no one read. A federal seal glinted on the far end of the courtroom, carved into oak, the kind of room where power was treated like currency, and silence was often bought by the hour. But on this morning, it was different. Because Nyla Carter wasn't here for a settlement. She was here for a reckoning. She sat behind the plaintiff's table, flanked by her legal team, and 2 representatives from the National Aerospace Integrity Board. Her badge now read Federal Witness. Her NASA contract rested in her briefcase, next to a copy of the original schematic stamped notarized and dated 3 years ago. Across the aisle sat Kepler Tech's legal army, 7 attorneys, a corporate VP with a fixed smile, and Brent Holloway, his once polished swagger dimmed by months of public scrutiny. He didn't look at her. Not yet. But he would. The courtroom was half full. Press lined the rear benches. A few industry reporters sat scribbling notes. No cameras allowed. No phones. Just eyes. And history being recorded in real time. The judge, a sharp black woman with steel-gray hair and zero tolerance for theatrics, called the room to order. This hearing concerns the ethics and intellectual property misconduct allegations against Kepler Tech Aerospace Inc. We are here to establish not just facts, but intent. Dr. Carter, you may begin. Nyla stood.
No tremble.
No script. Only memory. I was recruited by Kepler Tech under the pretense of innovation. I was assigned to the Artemis X propulsion division, but from the day I walked in, I wasn't seen as an engineer. I was called a quota, a diversity hire, a problem. She paused. They didn't just steal my design, they erased my name from files. They revoked my access, reassigned my work, and manufactured a narrative that labeled me unstable. She held up a photo, the still image of Brent in her lab coat. They weaponized perception, and they expected me to disappear quietly. The judge nodded once. Proceed with exhibits. Her team cued the audio files. Brent's voice filled the courtroom.
Then Kyle's.
Then laughter.
Then silence.
Then the slur.
One juror visibly flinched. Another wrote something in bold letters. Then came the document trail. Commit logs altered. Timestamps rewritten. HR reports doctored to discredit her. Finally, the messages. Just drop something in her file. Mental instability. Family trauma. Whatever. Let's not forget the Africa thing. Classic move. No one breathed. Brent's attorney stood to object. The judge shut him down instantly. You'll have your turn. Right now we are listening to the witness. When Nyla sat down, her fingers brushed the table like she needed to steady the room. But it wasn't the room that was shaking. It was the system brittle exposed. The prosecution called 2 more witnesses, an IT contractor, and the former intern, Jessa, who trembled on the stand but never looked away. They told us not to say her name. Jessa testified. They called her the liability, not to her face, but in meetings, in Slack threads. And why did you stay quiet? The attorney asked. Because I thought maybe I'd earn my way into safety. Nyla closed her eyes briefly, because she understood that feeling too well. Then came the final twist. The courtroom doors opened mid-proceeding. All eyes turned. Dr. Reyes stepped in. He looked smaller than Nyla remembered. Older, tired, but his voice when he took the stand didn't shake. I knew what they were doing. I tried to warn them it would implode. But I didn't stop it. I didn't protect her. I protected myself. The judge narrowed her gaze. Why speak now? Reyes looked across the aisle. Then, at Nyla. Because she never stopped building. And I couldn't keep hiding behind the debris. The court adjourned for lunch recess. Nyla walked slowly down the hall, her heels echoing off the stone. She passed Brent near the exit. He looked up briefly. No smirk. No word. Just a flash of something she hadn't seen before. Shame. He lowered his eyes and kept walking. That afternoon, the judge returned with her findings. This court finds clear deliberate misconduct by Kepler Tech Aerospace in the suppression, misappropriation, and falsification of intellectual property. We will recommend full federal investigation and suspension of all government contracts until the matter is resolved. The courtroom didn't cheer, but it didn't have to. Some victories are too serious to celebrate out loud. Outside, the air felt different. Heavy with justice, light with relief. Reporters swarmed. But Nyla said only one thing. I came here with my truth. And it turns out, that's enough. Then she walked away. Not toward the cameras. Not toward the noise. but toward the next room, the one she was building now, where black girls wouldn't need badges to prove brilliance, where truth wouldn't need to fight this hard to be heard. As she entered the street, her phone buzzed. A message from NASA Legal. Congrats. But be advised, Kepler Tech is attempting to appeal. Their last hope is discrediting your documentary footage as illegally obtained proprietary surveillance. Nyla smiled faintly. Too late. The footage had already been archived in the Library of Congress, labeled The Carter Files, a case study in modern workplace erasure. Her story wasn't just history now. It was public record. But as she crossed the street, something else caught her eye. A young girl, maybe 14, standing near the curb with a school folder clutched to her chest. She wore an oversized NASA sweatshirt. Her backpack had 3 pins on it. One read,
STEM is for us too.
Nyla smiled and nodded.
The girl lit up.
Didn't ask for a photo. Just whispered, they can't ignore us anymore, right? Nyla's answer came without pause. No, not anymore. But just as she reached her car, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Voicemail transcript loaded automatically. A male voice. Low. Calculated. You think it's over?
We still have your earliest files.
You forgot what you uploaded to the university cloud back in. Check your archive. 1 folder's missing. Nyla's face shifted. The sky above was bright, but her screen dimmed with the echo of something unfinished. She unlocked her tablet, opened her encrypted archive, scrolled to the earliest folder, and froze. 1 file, her original schematic draft, was gone. Wiped clean, and in its place a new file name had appeared. Rewritten by KTech. They tried to silence her, erase her, pretend she was never there. But truth has a way of surviving, even when it's buried deep. If you believe stories like hers deserve to be heard, deserve to matter, type yes. If you believe in justice,